Welcome everyone! This is the Criterion Cut. Yes, we kind of renamed the show. Just ignore it and move on. I am Peter, and joining me is David.
Konnichiwa.
Welcome everyone. We are back to the work of Akira Kurosawa. This is our monthly show where we look at Criterion films, and we are going to one of his earlier films, perhaps not his first film by any means, but his first sort of big film. Like, Criterion used to do this thing where they would do like DVD sets called the Eclipse series, and it tended to be like, okay, they've done a lot of Kurosawa, or they've done a lot of Ozu or Bergman, so they'll do like these box sets of DVDs that were, here's their sort of early movies that aren't as big as the rest, but we'll do a little box set, so we've put all these out as well. I think this is the earliest one, sort of after the Eclipse sets, in Criterion's own terminology.
So the way that I heard it described as I was researching this briefly was that this is the first movie that Kurosawa basically was able to do his directorial stuff before he was just kind of a for-hire director.
Okay.
And this was the first one he managed to come out and be like, no, this is what I want to do with the movie.
Okay. So yeah, I actually hadn't seen this before. This was a first-time watch. When I was picking movies for the show, I was mostly picking things I'd seen. It's not the first one. Virgin Spring was also a first time watch, but I intentionally went with the biggie. We started with Seven Samurai, but I was like, okay, it's going to be time for Kurosawa again before long, and I made the choice to switch to a Kurosawa that I hadn't seen, so that it's just keeping it fresh for me, and I'm bouncing around first time watches and rewatches. Before we get into the review, which will start spoiler free, of course, as we always do, there's a little bit of housekeeping, a little bit of an announcement to make pertaining to this show, which is that this is going to be the last episode available to the public.
Pause for everyone to go, oh no, and then continue.
Yeah, dramatic effect. Basically, our regular bonus episode is ending that we do on Patreon at the $3 and up tiers, and this show is going to replace that on Patreon. It's a monthly show already anyway. This was kind of our third monthly show, and the bonus episode's been kind of tough to pick movies for, and also David has got a lot of other things to fit into his schedule coming very soon. So as a result, the bonus is out, and the Criterion Cut is now the bonus episode on Patreon. We had no interest in losing this show because it's actually a very fun one to do, because we're doing great, important films. So,
that's why I just like getting dressed up.
Oh, okay. Well, to each their own. So yeah, just wanted to get that out of the way. This will be the last episode that's available on YouTube. From henceforth, the show is continuing beyond this, but it'll be a Patreon exclusive show after this episode. So next month, you'll only get it if you're signed up over at patreon.com/MailFuzzTV. That's a natural plug. So
it's also not a huge amount. Just throw that out. It's only like $3, right? This is on the $3 tier.
Yeah. This is on the first tier. This is on the $3.
Yeah.
You get this, and you get the bonus streams after midnight episodes. Assuming Tim's back from paternity leave. So that is the plan. So Drunken Angel. What is the premise of Drunken Angel? It is about a small town doctor named Sanada who kind of takes it upon himself to try and help and treat a member of the Yakuza, Matsunaga, who is played by Toshiro Mifune, who I did not recognize at first because he is shaven and he is young, and once he started yelling a bit more, I was like, oh wait a minute, I can see it, because he does do the over the top angry kind of mannerisms a lot.
Yeah, there's a point, it's towards the end of the movie, and I won't say why, but he gets the crazy eyes going, and that's the first time I was like, there he is. The crazy eyes running.
Yeah, the actor who plays Sanada as well, Takashi Shimura, he's also a regular collaborator, well, at least from this onwards anyway, with Kurosawa. So, yeah, you've got them, and he is basically trying to look after this Yakuza member who's got tuberculosis, and he's very resistant to getting help, and the doctor's also an alcoholic, hence the title, Drunken Angel, because he effectively starts acting like this guy's angel. Maybe not literally, but close enough. But there's also some other things going on. We've got other Yakuza members. We've got a villain of sorts, and we have just the vibe of the town and what's going on. So that is the general gist of the film. David, what did you think of Drunken Angel?
So,
well,
not having...
once you watched it, because you watched the wrong movie first, then we had to delay the recording.
Thank you, Pete. We could have just let that sit, but thank you.
No. I just remembered, I haven't told them that yet, that we had to delay. I sat down, I put my shirt and tie on yesterday. I sat down, I was ready to go, I was all hyped up for Criterion. And then David sent me a message going, all right, so we're ready to talk about this French film? And I went, wait a minute, David, I think you may be a little confused.
I mean, in fairness... I came back and I didn't even wait for our next recording day. I said, look, I will, as soon as I'm done with work tomorrow, I'm in. I will have it ready. You don't have to wait that long.
Look, the audience deserve to know. And I will
make sure to tell the audience everything that you mess up on as well.
Well,
anyway,
it's a very short list, so
yes,
by all means, go for it.
So, for this movie, obviously I have not been hugely exposed to Kurosawa. Last time, Seven Samurai was actually my first real exposure to him. There had just been brief little... I'm aware of who he is. I'm aware of what he did. Mind you, I feel like I specifically associate him as the samurai director. So the moment this movie started and it was set in quote-unquote modern day, I was very... I wouldn't say confused, but surprised. I was surprised of oh, wait, right, he can do other things.
Of course he can. Which, by the way, just for the record, this came out in 1948. So when David says modern day, just so you've got context for what modern day is in this case.
It's very clearly post-war Japan.
Yes.
So, in regards to all that,
that's wild. This is only 3 years after Hiroshima and Nagasaki. That is wild to think about.
And I mean, it's they say that the whole thing takes place just outside of Tokyo, it's a slum outside Tokyo. So this is pretty much central Japan. This is right where people live. But regardless, beating around the bush, do I like it? Yes, with the caveat of I still think I prefer Seven Samurai to this pretty cleanly. I think it's good.
David, I don't think you saying Seven Samurai, considered one of the best films of all time by every major critical body on the planet, is a hot take.
I'm not saying it is a hot take, but what I am saying here is that if we're just going ahead with Kurosawa's rankings here, this is very clearly below. This is not something where I feel that he's really gotten into the same sort of style, the ability to show with camera motion and his editing style. I don't feel he's really gotten into the groove of it yet. It's there, you can see the snippets of it, but it still has yet to develop.
Yeah. So what did I think? I liked it quite a bit. I think it's a really solid drama, which has its metaphors kind of wearing it on its sleeve a little bit. There's this giant puddle in the middle of this little slum town area. Which is, it's just this dirty puddle. It's not like an actual water feature. It's just this big dirty puddle that's always there.
Built up sewage, pretty much.
Yeah, and the comparison between that being a metaphor for the hole in Mifune's lungs for the TB, and the idea that the town itself has a sickness. And the doctor wants to fight the sickness by trying to help this guy. That metaphor it's on its sleeve, it's there, it's really solid stuff. I think there's a lot of effective sequences. And is this up there with Seven Samurai or some of the other absolute classics that Kurosawa did? It's not quite on that level, but it's a really solid film where you can kind of tell that his craft is largely already there. This, you can sort of feel him experimenting with how he does certain things in this, and there's a great moment early on where, despite the fact that this is 1948, so there's not really any visible blood or certainly not any visible wounds on anyone. There's a scene early on when the doctor's just examining a wound on Mifune at the start that is actually kind of it's kind of, and it's all just with suggestion of the fact that we don't see a wound, but we know there's a wound there, and the way they show that there's a wound there. But the medical contraptions kind of dangling off of his hand is just actually I was like, oh, that's actually quite effective, and I wasn't expecting that. So
there's plenty of moments in this where they they do that smash cut. They do the what could possibly go wrong cut to it going wrong sort of thing. And it's such a, I don't know, it seems like such a modern thing. I'm sure it's existed for forever, but it is one of those things where when they do it, I'm like, oh yeah, this is these little editing tricks that are just these interesting ways to convey the meaning that I don't expect from movies that long ago, I still feel like at that point they were kind of deciphering what those editing tricks were and how they convey like the Kuleshov effect and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, Citizen Kane is often credited with a lot of modern techniques, and that was 1941, if I remember correctly. So this is, this is a few years later than that. But obviously it's in a different part of the world. I don't know necessarily. I assume there was exposure to American films in Japan, but hey, maybe not, given the fact that literally in World War II there were on opposite sides. Maybe not. Maybe it wasn't easy to see those movies for a time period. Maybe.
I just imagine there being a Japanese version of Citizen Kane that was made without the knowledge of actual Citizen Kane, and he sees the original. And he's like, great, I got scooped.
I was going to say maybe those bootlegs, but I'm like, wait a minute, it's the 40s. They don't have anything at home that can play anything.
At that point, it's just kabuki theater.
Yeah, it's just a bootleg theater somewhere. Someone's like importing illegal prints. Yeah, no, I think it's a really solid character study that is also a study of the what's going on in this like small community, this society, and the idea that the Yakuza are a virus on the good people that live there. I think that's all really solid. It's a really small movie, but it's a really effective movie that tackles its themes, tackles its characters, and I was constantly looking at just little moments of symbolism or other things like that, and it's about an hour 40. It's a very satisfying watch. It's got a point that it makes by the end, and the performances from both leads are very, very good. Yeah,
no, I agree. I think that there is one primary character. Let me see if I can get/pronounce her name.
Is this Nani?
No, I think it's Mio.
Mio, this is the woman who lives with a doctor.
Yes. I gotta say, out of all the primary cast, she was probably the weakest for me. I think everyone did a really good job, but the way that she was filmed or something like that, even though I couldn't understand the language, it just came across as really soap opera, like every time she was acting.
I mean, it's hard to argue either for or against what you just said, because it is in Japanese. So while I can appreciate the performances to a point, the delivery of the dialogue, sometimes obviously some of the nuance isn't quite there in translation, but
I do think that it was possibly part of the directing as well, because the one thing that really triggered it in my mind where I was paying attention to it for the rest of the film was someone makes a motion at her, and it does a specific cut to her, and she just goes, and I'm like, all right, well, that's a bit much.
Okay. But yeah, no, there's some really effective sequences. The introduction of Okada, I won't talk about any context here, but the introduction of him is very effective. Yeah. And it's almost like a different movie, just casually walks into the movie, if that makes sense.
I mean, for me, the first thing that popped in my mind was exactly how Quentin Tarantino did Kill Bill. It struck that same sort of tone almost immediately.
I guarantee you Tarantino has watched this.
Oh, no doubt.
I guarantee you he watches a lot of stuff. He's watched a lot of weirder stuff than Kurosawa. Let me tell you that.
Yep.
So no, it's all very good. I think the character, the main two characters are very strong, and I think they're very interesting to watch because none of this plays out they both basically act like they hate each other at every possible chance, and then it means something else when the doctor is going out of his way to try and help him. It's sort of like he'll talk he'll talk almost with vitriol about him, or to him even, and about how he's useless and how he's a blight on society, but then he'll try and help him anyway. And it's those little things, like the back and forth. It's almost like a platonic Sam and Diane kind of thing they've got going in a weird way.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's the centerpiece of this whole movie regardless of any other character developments that go on, is their, I guess the easiest way to say is friendship, but like it isn't. Even by the end of the movie, there is still this sort of banter between them where, despite them doing both good and bad things for each other, they keep on up this idea, this sort of playfulness of like, no, we don't actually like each other. We just keep calling each other idiots the whole time. Yeah. So it's this great little dissection of, you have someone who needs medical help and someone who just wants to help people, is a doctor and is able to do that. And despite the fact that they may not like each other, they keep on coming together because they just need each other to live, basically, at this point.
Yeah. So not much of a spoiler-free section on this one, I don't think, because
no.
Ultimately, I feel like, yeah, most of what we're going to want to talk about is the character development. So, yeah, I think we'll just give the spoiler warning so we can dive into Drunken Angel a bit more in depth. Okay. So, yeah, the movie here, I don't know if we'll necessarily go in order. We'll probably stick to themes more than anything else, but I do think it's worth talking about the opening, because the opening's a good, like, maybe 10 minutes? Well, maybe not 10 minutes, but it's a long...
It's long, yeah.
Opening scene of, Matsunaga, Mifune's character, coming to the doctor, and he's got his hand wrapped up, and he lies about what it is. He says he, like, slammed his hand in a door, and then he said there was a nail in it, and that's why there's such a deep cut. And then the doctor's, like, sort of rummaging through the cut, and then he pulls out a bullet, and he's like... He just sort of grunts that.
Hell of a nail.
So, like, it's all really fun, but the thing that I was alluding to earlier is that after they established this, there's a couple of really neat things. Like, one is just how icky and, like, gory it feels, despite the fact they don't show anything, because he takes those, what would you call them, clamps, I guess? But they've got, like, handles like scissors, right? So you've all seen doctors use these, especially in operating room scenes, where they'll use them to sort of, like, peel back and keep, like, a wound open, right? So they'll have these, like, clamp scissor things. The doctor basically puts, like, 4 of them into his, like, hand wound, and you don't see it. You sort of see it from underneath his... So it's the palm of his hand that's got the injury, right? But so we're only seeing the back of his hand, but you see these 4 clamps just dangling off either side of his hand, and the entire time I'm just... it's that thing where, because you don't see it, you're imagining... Because of the way they're dangling quite freely, that his, like, wound skin is just, like, bouncing back and forth like that, and I'm like, this is implying an awful wound. All I can imagine is this big gash and just blood coming out.
Well, it's especially thrown down even more because when he digs out the bullet, like, he doesn't care. He doesn't... Like, he has no reaction on his face to this bullet being dug out. He's whatever. But the moment this scene starts with the clamps, you just see this intense pain across his face as he just does this. The doctor and the gangster, if I don't want to give their full names, but Matsunaga just has this intense pain on his face as Sanada is just tearing open this wound, and it just sells it that little bit extra more through the acting.
And Sanada, the doctor, he is, like, just casually swigging booze, like, left and right during this.
There is, I forget where it is in this movie, so I'll just bring it up here. There is one scene where he has rubbing alcohol, and it's specifically marked as, like, 100% alcohol, and then he just pours some tea in it and says, that's good enough to drink, and just starts downing it for the rest of the scene.
Yeah, you would expect it to be the opposite. You'd expect this 100% alcohol to be the little bit at the bottom and then pour in the tea. No, he has a full bottle of this alcohol and just pours in a tiny little amount of tea and goes, yep, that's enough flavour. That'll do. Yeah. No, I mean, I think that the point about him, like, not acting like he's in pain, and then this is too much, and it sort of, like, reveals the pain. I think this goes with one of his big character things, is that he thinks he has to act tough. He's not. He doesn't want to show his vulnerability, so he's putting on the tough act the entire time. And this is clearly indicating, no, there's a threshold where you can't just pretend anymore. That the pain is going to be too much, and you're going to need help. And that's basically foreshadowing the entire movie, right there with that. The other thing in this scene that I really like, there's a real emphasis, and I think I want to say it's after he's found the bullet and before he starts doing the rest of the cleanup job on his hand. The doctor Sanada gets up and he goes over and he, like, goes to, like, pry the door open, and then the door keeps, like, trying to close, so he has to, like, get, like, the bin or something to put in front of it so it won't close. The way the scene paused for this to happen, it felt very symbolic to me, and I was sort of... it's one of those things where in the moment I was like, okay, like, he doesn't want to be left alone with the criminal underbelly of the town, maybe. But obviously, I don't have the whole context yet of the movie to like analyze this moment per se. So that's what I was thinking in the moment. But like, I feel like there's maybe a bit more to it that I've not quite sussed out yet.
I mean, for me, it kind of goes to because he specifically, as he's trying to keep this door open, he shows this analyzing as it closes shut. He doesn't immediately grab the bin. He like looks at the door. He stares at it for a while as if he's trying to like diagnose it more or less, of see what's wrong with it. But then in the end, he can't fix it, so he just puts a Band-Aid on it with the bin in the way and then says, all right, good enough, and then goes back to it. I feel like that's kind of the larger thing here, where when we get to the rest of Matsunaga's plot, he realizes like there's only so much he can do, and at a certain point he's just putting Band-Aids on things, trying to keep it going for a little bit longer.
I like that read. I think I was reading that maybe pivoting more towards the idea that he doesn't want to get into a relationship with this guy. He doesn't want to become this guy's doctor, but the way the doors keeps insisting on closing is basically fate telling him, no, it doesn't matter how much you resist, you're going to want to help him. Like, you're going to want to get involved. Like, that's kind of how I was getting
that
at
works,
it. But
yeah, totally valid.
But either way, like, you know, it really felt like an artsy movie moment, you know, like it was like, oh no, we're pausing to make this little point about him trying to get this door closed, or stay open rather, and it keeps trying to close shut. But then he hears him cough. He hears Matsunaga cough, and he like does a couple of taps. And he's like tap tap, and even though he doesn't want to be checked, he's like, no, I'm looking at this. And he's like, okay, I think you've got TB. He's like, you're full of shit. You doctors are a bunch of quacks. You just want to make more money by telling me I've got something wrong that I need to keep coming back for. And he's like, look, go get an X-ray. Like you know, it'll just prove me right. Like, I'm not going to argue with you. Just go, piss off. And they leave on these really cold terms. This does not end with like.
Well, he straight up like attacks him. He straight tackles him down to the ground after after Sonata says some harsh words to him about how he needs to get himself checked out. Basically, it just comes down to him calling him a fool and saying how, you know, oh, you're not that tough. You need to. It's TB. Like, you can't just act tough your way through TB. Go get an X-ray.
Yeah.
And Matsunaga just attacks him. And at that point, the nurse, the girl who lives with Sonata, shows up and basically gets him out of there.
Yeah. Although I think girl might be underselling that she's more middle-aged, but yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is relevant because she's like the ex-wife of another character later on, which is the whole thing that's introduced. Which I suppose we get into because they tease that quite early on. Is that they start talking? She's talking to Sanada, and she's worried because Okada is in. By the way, I just want to say there's a very famous like present day wrestler named Okada, and it was really hard not to think of him every time they used the name. Clearly it's just a Japanese name that's, you know, relatively common, but yeah.
I just imagine any point in this movie where it's like, Okada, he could be anywhere and coming in from the top rope.
So she's worried about Okada getting out of prison, right? And it becomes clear that she was with Okada and that he might want revenge for whatever part she played, and even if it was just running away from him, or if indeed helping get him getting caught. But he was in prison for almost 4 years, I think they said. Yeah. And one of the other things we learn later on as it goes is that Matsunaga, he's running this town like for the Yakuza, and this was Okada's turf before, and he was given it to sort of look after it whilst Okada was in prison. We find that out later, but she's worried about this, and this comes up, and it's kind of like, okay, we've been introduced to this idea that there's this violent guy, this ex-husband, whatever you want to call him, who's with the Yakuza, who's maybe getting out of prison, but we don't know for sure, right? No, they don't have like any concrete answers in this conversation, and that's why his entrance, because you kind of forget about him, because it goes a little bit where the movie goes along with all the medical plot, and then all of a sudden there's this character outside by the puddle who we see a few times playing guitar, and then it's just this one quiet night where this guy's playing guitar, and then this other guy shows up and like asks to borrow the guitar, and there's a whole scene here of him playing this song, and we cut to Mio inside the doctor's place, which is right next to this area, and she's like, that's Okada's favorite song. He's here somewhere, he's out. And the only benefit she has right now is that he doesn't know that she's there. So that's something that comes up later on as well.
That is also a thing that recurs in this movie, is that people who run in the gang that belongs to Matsunaga, they all keep on seeing her and saying, "You look familiar. How do I know you?" But they just can't place it as Okada's old girl.
Yeah. So we're interested in the fact that there's like a small diner and there's like a woman who works there who's got a crush in Matsunaga. Even though he's a Yakuza, she's like, no, he's good at heart, he could be better.
I can change him.
Yeah, which, you can make fun of that, but that's kind of the point of the movie, is that he is maybe deep down better, and like that's what the doctor's fighting for. He's trying to like make this better person come out the whole time. And by the end, he's kind of succeeded, but sadly, it's kind of in vain because well, we'll get there. But so those scenes where like, the doctor just goes to see him. And Matsunaga doesn't want to talk to him. They go for a drink, but the doctor's like, no, you can't have any. You've got TB now. This is terrible for you. So I'll drink yours. And again, it turns into this bickering fight. It does repeatedly. Like the entire. I mean, it never really stops, but I would say especially the first half of the movie there's kind of like a back and forth of like, he goes to see him, and eventually. Matsunaga has the X-ray, that proves, what he said, and he kind of reluctantly has to accept that he's going to need treatment. So there's this kind of like uneasy kind of like doctor-patient relationship that's formed, which almost immediately is like shot to shit. But we'll get to that in a minute, because there's a clear turning point for me in the movie where things take a pivot. Before we get to that, though, we do also have to introduce an interesting little character tidbit. So. To talk about Sanada, the doctor, for a little while, he is a really well-rounded character because obviously he's this alcoholic, but he's also a doctor who wants to actually do good. And part of the reason why he maybe is an alcoholic is because he feels that he's failing and that the town itself has a disease. That's what the big puddle represents. It represents the Yakuza as the infection, and the town is, suffering because of it. But we also he's got a little bit of a Walter White thing going. Not that he's cooking crystal meth in a camper, but in that he's basically got this rivalry with someone from med school who is a big successful doctor in the good part of town, probably in Tokyo, making lots of money. And he's this slums doctor who's barely got the supplies to like get by, and this is like brought up in a scene with Mio, probably the same scene where they talk about Akada for the first time. And then we actually get to meet this doctor, where he shows up in his like carriage, and Sanada goes in and talks to him.
He's very clearly more wealthy in just every way. So
you've got this idea of like this like disgruntled doctor who life, and maybe part of it's his fault, but life has really dealt him a bit of a short hand. And he thinks this other guy's a bit of a quack because he was actually the better student than him the entire time, but this other guy's went on to become successful.
Well, see, that the scene is actually this, and one other scene what he's talking about the doctor. This is this part that I think is actually a bit more informative, because it wasn't that life dealt him a bad hand. He specifically says that during med school, this doctor would, like, yes, they were basically on the exact same level going into it, but Sanada just couldn't control drinking. He was spending all of his money at like brothels and stuff like that. And so it's just been a carry-on effect the whole time for like decades after their med school, where he just could not get out of that, whereas the other one was able to get ahead.
Yeah, he also mentions that he would like pawn his clothes to pay for a hooker for the night. That's something he says at one point. Which actually makes a lot of sense thematically, that he fell into a lot of the same things that Matsumaga's doing. Basically, I mean, he's doing it in a totally different context because he's doing it as a member of the Yakuza, whereas, the doctor was never a member of a gang like that. But that's effectively, he's got a girlfriend, he's drinking, he's going to the clubs every night. He's living this life without any care for who he is and what may happen to him. So it makes sense that he kind of like recognizes at least some of himself in Matsunaga. So no, it's good to bring that up. See, I watched this yesterday because we were going to record yesterday, and then, as mentioned,
I watched it yesterday too. I watched it right before bed. So
look, I saw an opportunity for a jab. I took it. Okay.
I know.
Yeah, but no, I think these two scenes are really good though, because it really sets up like I felt like it really fleshed out like Sanada on his own, and it sort of like painted a picture of who he is, why he is where he is, and why it feels kind of hopeless, and that's why it's kind of inspirational that he still somehow manages to try. You know, he still kind of makes the effort, even though he talks like it's never going to work. He talks like, you know, nothing we do ever makes a difference. But then he tries anyway, and that's actually very endearing. So despite any faults he might have, you're kind of like rooting for him. And when he does get angry at Matsunaga for drinking, for going back on his word to live under doctor's orders, it comes across as like, oh yeah, you're being an angry dick at him right now, but honestly, he earned it. You know, you're like, we're on your side every step of the way almost.
Plus, there's also one scene much later on in the film where Matsunaga gets brought to Sanada's house. He's like coughing up blood at this point. His disease has progressed. And he straight up says, straight out, just, no, he's not my patient. I'm not going to see him. I'm not going to do that. But you can see Mio is still getting everything prepared. And Sanada keeps on asserting, no, I'm not going to see him. And then it does the smash cut to him seeing the patient. Yeah, because we knew he would.
It's the ironic cut. It's something something the hit television show Buffy the Vampire Slayer did a lot, actually. You know, this example's from Angel, but there's a scene where like Buffy and Angel, like, because they can't normally have sex for just mythology reasons, but they can in this episode, and someone says, like, they have not been able to bang for a long time. What do you think they're doing down there? Just having tea and crackers? And it cuts to them having tea and crackers really awkwardly. Like, you know, that's just an example of the ironic cut where but it's like you say, it's like Mio isn't like defying his wishes, she just knows he's going to do it. So she's preparing for it, and that's what makes it endearing.
Real quick, speaking of the comedy of this, the carriage scene with the other doctor has one of my favorite exchanges in the whole movie. I'm sure it's translated slightly, but it came across as Sanada's asking, hey, I need more alcohol. And he says, what? No, you're going to drink it all. And he says, no, it's not like that. It's for my practice. I ran out. And he's like, oh, what happened to the alcohol in your practice? And he's like, I drank it all.
Yeah, no, that was good. The big turning point, though, is that it's right after, like, it's like the third visit or whatever it is that he's had, where he actually is agreeing with Sanada that he is going to not drink. He's going to actually listen to what he's saying. He's taking it a bit more seriously now. And he goes out, and there's this great quiet moment where he's just looking at the puddle, this big puddle, and he's kneeled down next to it. And I think he's looking at like a doll that's floating in the water. Again, kind of symbolic, all that. And Okada basically taps him on the shoulder, and immediately Matsunaga says, oh, hey, brother. And he said, you know, not literal brother, but like, you know, brother in Yakuza kind of
brother
idea.
In arms.
And immediately he's like, you know, very, you know, subservient to him. He's like, oh, this is clearly the elder Yakuza member. He's paying respects. He's excited to see him. And I thought what was really interesting about this is that this is the first time we've seen him act like this the whole movie. It felt like his demeanor completely changed the second he was in his presence. And it was also exciting as a viewer because you're like, wait a minute, he's connected to the Akada that's, you know, connected to the whole Mio plot. That is, you know, that was like a big kind of like, oh shit, he's going to have like, you know, a conflict about this probably later on, that, you know, this guy is maybe going to want to go after the doctor because he's harboring his ex-wife. And he's going to have to make some sort of try. And sure enough, that's something that does come up later on in the film. But
it's one of those Hitchcock like bomb under the table things where we now have all the pieces revealed. It's just a matter of how long is it going to take for Okada to get to the doctor.
And I think what's so good about it is that it's just after he's like agreed to actually follow the doctor's orders. And then in walks this influence who's going to, and he does, like at the very next scene, he convinces him to have a drink. He makes him feel bad for not drinking with him. So Matsunaga says, okay, I'll have one drink. Smash cut to him being absolutely smashed. He's just falling over. And you get the impression that this is much worse because of the TB. Like he's not, like, he could probably handle his liquor, but because of the TB, he is like a zombie walking around.
Yeah, everyone else in his gang is walking totally normal. Meanwhile, he needs to be held up as he goes.
You know,
it's also worth noting one of the major places in this town that they keep coming back to, and specifically apparently the Yakuza hang out in, is this dance hall.
Yeah.
And we get full musical numbers at least one in this area. So that was surprised when we got there.
Yeah, we get one. So around this time, actually, because this is the scene that kind of ends with. So one thing we've not talked about is that Matsunaga has a girlfriend, who we see a couple times, and you don't get too much of an impression of her, other than just that she's maybe not like the sweet girl at the cafe who wants to change him. She's not that. She seems like she's with him because he's powerful, because he's strong, because he's got money, whatever. Yeah. And when we're at this dance scene when he's completely smashed and he says, "Hey Okada, why don't you dance with my girl?" And you can kind of see where this is going, and he's kind of staring at her like all intense, and that sort of like sets us down a path to the point where after this is where he coughs up blood and they take him to Sanada, and Sanada's like, "Okay, I'm not doing it," but of course he ends up treating them, but he's like, "No, you're bedridden now," and they've got Matsunaga back at his place, and they've got him in bed. It's like, you're not to get up, you're staying here. And it's such a kind of an interesting sight. It makes sense that the movie got to this point where he's so sick that he can't even really walk anymore. And it's kind of his own fault for like drinking and stuff when he was told he shouldn't, but he was acting so tough as if it wasn't a big deal, like really up until quite recently in the story, that it was actually still quite shocking to see him look so weak and so helpless. And sure enough, like, going back to this idea that the Yakuza and the people around him are part of the disease that he needs to be free of. There's the literal disease inside him, but then there's a disease that he's in the real world. His girlfriend just wants to leave him and, makes up a reason that she's running off, but she's actually just running off to be with Okada. And it's just this really sad, pathetic scene that's really kind of difficult to watch. Yeah. She's like because she's sneaking around, like, trying not to wake him up at first, but then he wakes up and he's been awake the whole time. But he eventually like reveals. He calls her out.
He's like, "Hey, what you doing?"
So they have this awkward scene where she's like, "Oh, I got a job, and I'd stay and look after you, but I need to go."
But it is also this sort of, he knows what's going on at the same time. He's not trying to keep her around out of like love or anything. He's trying to basically just tell her like, "You're a horrible person, and I want you to be aware," because he tells him like, "Oh, okay, you're leaving and you're saying we're still good, then give me a kiss." And she's like, I don't want to do that when you have TB. And he's like, "Well, you're afraid you're gonna get it? Come here." And so he basically just like, I don't want to say forces himself on her, but like, tries to grip her and pull her down. And she, he eventually gets a kiss from her, and she just stands up, wipes it off, spits, and she just leaves the room. But
yeah, what more visual do you need for how she's disregarded him and spitting after the kiss?
Yeah, exactly. So it's a scene though where it's not trying to play it up as like, "Oh, if only she would love him." It's like, no, they're horrible for each other and they know it.
Oh yeah. It's awkward because you know exactly what she's doing, and he knows exactly what she's doing, and I think that's why it feels so bad. Yeah. And yeah, the drunken doctor's the only one. Well, not the only one. The girl at the diner also likes him. But yes. The doctor's looking out for him, and this woman who's supposed to be his partner is ditching him at the first sign of trouble. So it's got a bit of weight behind it.
Although what apparently ends up happening, and I didn't quite follow this transition, but what apparently ends up happening is that the doctor then comes to visit and is basically saying like, "Hey, where is he? He's not here anymore." He's talking to like two of his Yakuza buddies, and it turns out that he at least came to the conclusion that the girl threw him out of their apartment while he was supposed to be bedridden. And so at that point, Okada does end up meeting up with the doctor, because obviously he's seeing the girlfriend at this point, and throws him out of the apartment as well. So that's one step closer towards them meeting and coming to this conclusion.
Yeah, it's basically some of the goons eventually remember, like, where they recognize I'll refer, Miyu is basically his nurse, but like, officially or otherwise, and they remember who she is, and that leads to Okada coming and like demanding to know where she is, and she never steps out and reveals herself. She's just sort of like around the corner listening to it the entire time. It's a very tense scene though because of that.
And in between these scenes, we had Sanada meet back up with Matsunaga, who was just chilling outside, even though he should have been bedridden, and tells him like, "Okay, well, guess you're staying with me. Guess you're going to be at my place now." So during this entire scene where Okada is coming and basically threatening Sanada for information about Mio, Matsunaga's in the back room and he's bedridden, he's sick, but he is able to hear all this. And it doesn't take too much threatening of Sanada for Matsunaga to come out and throw himself
this is
at Okada's feet.
Yeah, this is his heroic moment of like, he can't really fight right now, but he's going to go out there and stand in front of Sanada and say, hey, look, this guy's saving my life. You know, I'm sure we can deal with this, you know, peacefully another time or whatever. Like he goes out there and talks him down, and sure enough, Okada does leave. But this just leads to an even more heartbreaking thing the next day when Matsunaga goes to try and talk to the boss, like the Yakuza boss. And this is someone that we've never even really heard. Like, we might have heard like the briefest mention of a boss at some point, but this has not been a character up until this point. He goes to the house of like the guy who is the head of this part of the Yakuza. So that's not Okada, it's there's someone above them, right? Whoever gave him this position in the first place. And he wants to go and speak to him, but he ends up eavesdropping as the boss is talking to Okada. And Okada's complaining, why did you give my turf to that little shithead? Matsunaga, he's hopeless. And the boss is just like, yeah, I mean, honestly, it's because I knew it would be easy for you to take it back when you get out. And he's got TB, he's worthless now. We're going to basically just use him as a pawn. He can die at the hands of our enemy, the rival gang, and that's as useful as he can be right now. And Matsunaga hears all this. He hears every word of it, and he knows just how, you know, expendable he is to them. You know, so this was supposed to be his family. This was supposed to be like his tribe, his honorable party that he felt like he was part of and was going to look out for him.
As he was leaving, and this entire time, the doctor keeps on laying into him, saying, like, you're stupid for being in the Yakuza. Like, all you guys care about is, like, money and power. There's nothing in there. And Matsunaga keeps on justifying it over and over, saying, no, our tribe, our friendship, our brotherhood runs deeper than that. There is true loyalty in there. And he keeps on using that as a justification. In fact, that's the whole reason he goes to see the big boss. He's like, I have served dutifully for all this time. He'll understand that. He'll like get me the help I need and make sure this does, like, all this works out. And then he gets there and hears that, and it just crumbles everything he believed. Yeah, all in one scene.
His life shatters before his eyes in a way. It's like he's probably dying, and if he doesn't die from TB, his family, quote unquote, are going to just throw him to the wolves. And
he doesn't even do anything against the big boss at this point. He just leaves. He can't do anything at all at this point, so he just walks away. Yeah,
he ends up getting drunk in the diner with the girl who likes him, and she's like, hey, I'm going to move to like my family's ranch, you should come with me. And she's like making all these suggestions, and you know, she believes that she's kind of like talking him into it, and that's something she says later, is like, I think I was getting through to him. And in some level, you kind of want to believe that maybe she's right. Maybe on some level, he was sort of thinking about this life and thinking it was for him. Obviously, the actual tragedy of what happens here is that he goes to his girlfriend's place and Okada's there. And there's a great thing here. This is the bomb under the table thing, like you said. Right before he arrives, Okada's playing guitar. And what's her name? Nane.
Nane.
Yeah, Matsumiga's ex. She's like sort of like, you know, just hugging him from behind. She pulls out this fancy knife that was in his pocket. It's got like a sort of case, and she sort of pulls it out and she's looking at it, and she throws it over onto like the couch or the bed that's on the other end of the room. And it's like, oh, they've just established as a weapon there. And then sure enough,
an actual Chekhov's gun. Yeah. Except it's a knife.
And seconds later is when Okada shows up, and it's because he wants to see her, but of course he's like, oh, is he here? Is Okada here? And he comes in and he does try to fight Okada. He pulls out a knife and he wants to fight him. And this is where you're like, this was the moment where you've made the dumb choice. Like, if the doctor was getting through to you because you were learning, you were getting better, you stuck up for the doctor, you've learned that your Yakuza brethren weren't there for you. So you've learned enough to maybe make the smart choice, but sadly, he's still making the choice out of anger and revenge, where he's going after Okada because he sees him as the... Basically, I think in this moment, at least, he sees him as the reason for everything that's happening to him. Like, you're the perpetrator in my life right now.
I agree. I think that he does see him in that regard, but I also think it's one of those things. One character we haven't mentioned yet, which is a very important contrast, is this young schoolgirl who is also being treated by the doctor.
I was going to wait till the end to bring her up, because that's where she goes back into it.
It is a very important thing in that she follows all the directions. She does everything she needs to do, and by the end of the movie, she does end up getting better. I think that this is just the sign of, yes, he slipped, yes, he fell off the wagon when Okada first showed up, but I think it's supposed to mirror Sonata's thing, where he fell off the wagon back in med school, and he was never quite able to get himself back up. I think that we had that little glimpse of him trying to be on board, trying to get back to healthiness, and all it took was that one moment where Okada came in and told him to drink, and he was just never able to pull himself out of that again. And I think it's supposed to mirror the same sort of thing that happened with Sonata back in the day.
Yeah, well, I think Sonata, in some level, like, even if he's not consciously doing this, like, he's helping Mitsunaga because he, like, wants to, he feels that he can't do it himself. He can't, like, get on the wagon himself, so he's trying to help someone else do it. And that's why he gets so angry and calls him an idiot, because he's really talking about himself. And that's something that I think is there. And there's this idea that maybe because, okay, he's failed to help Mitsunaga by the end, but if he's helped this girl, you know, and they had the sort of, like, the slight happy note at the end after they're talking about Matsunaga's death, is that, oh, hey, I did help you, and if I helped you, maybe I can help myself. Maybe there is a bit of hope after all. But in this moment, I also question as well if on some level Matsunaga, because he is so ingrained into the idea of, like, Yakuza honor and all that, if maybe some part of him wanted to pick this fight because he knew he would probably lose, and he'd rather go out in a fight than to TB.
I don't even know if it was a probably lose thing. I think it was more so of he doesn't think he's going to live through TB, and so he doesn't want to go out being remembered as this weak, ineffectual member of the gang. He wanted to be someone who stood up and did something.
Yeah, he wants to be remembered as a fighter. Yeah. And this fight's quite interesting, actually, because obviously he attacks, and he's doing okay despite his condition until he starts coughing up blood in the middle of the fight.
Which is, like, the only time that we really see blood in this whole movie is him, just, it splatters onto the ground. Because
the first time he coughs up blood, you don't really see it. You just sort of see him, like, sort of kneel down and cough, and then they kind of, someone says, oh, is that blood? And it sort of gives you the clue. So this is actually quick, because you almost get lulled into this false sense of, oh, they can't show blood. And then you see it here, and you're like, oh, wait, okay, never mind. All right.
It's
okay.
Like, yeah, well, there it is. Yeah.
All right. That hit hard because of that. That was effective. And... yeah, so this is where Okada gets his knife, and they end up fighting, and they end up breaking out into the hallway, and we get this it's kind of spectacular how epic this feels, despite the fact that it's just in a little hallway and it's not that advanced. But because there's, like, some paint cans that spill and they end up kind of sliding in the paint, it just makes it all feel like it could almost be slapstick if it was just the tone was just off a little bit, but it doesn't. It doesn't feel like that. It feels more like, I'm not saying it's up to this level, but it feels like it's, like, on the way to being Roddy Piper and Keith David and They Live. Like, it's kind of like, you know, it's not quite up at that hard hitting level, but they're going for that feeling where it's these two tough guys just reaching for the knife to see who can stab each other first, and they're sliding through paint, and it's making it difficult for both of them. But ultimately, of course, Okada does stab Matsunaga.
Yeah. So during that scene, for me, I mean, I see what you were saying about it borderline being slapstick. And I did get that, especially because at one point they just throw the paint can, and then after that it's just them slip sliding around. But I think that what it accomplishes more than that is it mixes up the fight scene. It makes it so that it isn't just two people dancing around each other with a knife the whole time. And so even when Okada has the upper hand over and over and over again, he can just slip. He just loses his footing, and immediately that tension is able to reset and get back built up again over and over again until finally, like you said, he gets stabs.
What's so good, from the moment he shows up in the scene and the fight starts, it's like, okay, he's got a knife, but you know Okada's got a knife sitting right there if he gets to it. And then he coughs up blood, so it's like, okay, any advantage that he felt like he had is gone now because he's weak and his body's given out. And that's what's so sad about it, because it's like he's fighting a disease, but he's losing the battle. You know, so... yeah, he dies, and it sort of cuts ahead to the doctor with the girl from the diner, and she's saying, like, hey, no, I talked to him, and, like, he wanted to move to the ranch with me. He was going to change. He was going to be better. And I think it's incredibly nicely bittersweet that Sanada just doesn't believe that. He's like, you know what, I want it to be true. I want it to be true that he was changing, but ultimately he still failed, and part of me always thought that he was going to. And I think that's what makes the movie so effective, is that he got close. Like, he almost did actually make enough of a difference in this man's life that he maybe was going to reset him on the right course. But the influences of the previous life that were so ingrained and basically broke his heart so much that it just, it already ruined him effectively.
Which I think is what that comes back to with the mirroring, in that there is, he sees himself, he sees how he's stuck on this own path and he's unable to change it. And so because he saw himself in Matsunaga, he's like, yeah, no. As much as I was hoping and praying that he would be able to change, he ended up like me. And he just got to that point faster. Like, we're both on that collision course with what happens when we're unable to change our ways.
Yeah. But then, of course, the teenage girl who we saw in that one scene earlier where she's like, and it's like, hey, you're making good advancements. All you have to do is stay the course. You just have to fight this. It's not a, it's not a marathon. He brings up the turtle in the hair. Like, you got to be the turtle. You got to go slow and steady, and that's how you fight this. And she has, and she bet him a sweet that next time they see each other should be even better. And she shows up with an X-ray at the end. I did think to myself that you're not supposed to get an X-ray more than once every 2 years. However, I've got a funny feeling that maybe standards were a little different in the 1940s, and maybe they didn't have that rule yet.
Well, I mean, it's all about radiation, and Japan knows a lot about radiation at this point, so...
that was...
I'm sorry.
That was a bit problematic. It was a problematic joke of the day, everyone.
Definitely was standards were different, because, I mean, also it's one of those things when it comes down to TB, as he said in the beginning, is there's no real way to know. Like, we can run these tests and stuff, but you need an X-ray to find out, so...
Yeah, but yeah, she's like, yeah, I'm basically completely cured. I'm done. I'm good. And it's kind of this hopeful little thing where his advice did help her. And she was an easier case because she wasn't already so broken. But he did help her, and she's good now. And it's like he's, maybe if there's hope, if he was able to help her, maybe there's hope for him yet. So it ends kind of on a neat little happy moment.
I mean, I think for me, symbolically, yes, there was this shared parallel between him and Matsunaga, but if you look at it from a broader sense, it wasn't, I think it's more so a point of he wasn't able to redeem someone who was already corrupted, but he is able to preserve the innocence that still exists, and he has to take some level of solace in that,
Yeah, I mean, I can see what you're saying there. I think that's maybe a little too sad, though. I think, obviously, like, the movie doesn't go beyond this point, so we can't necessarily see him get, like, another chance to try and do the same thing again or whatever, but I think on some level, it's like, no, like, he was making a difference, and it's the sort of idea that this time he tried to fight the disease, and the disease won, but next time, if he tries just as hard, because he almost succeeded this time, he might be able to redeem someone. It might be possible. It's not completely out of the question. The disease just had too much of a hold on the previous person. Because that's the big thing, is that it's not just like that Matsunaga made some bad choices. It's, a lot of them were influenced by Okada and the people around him and the culture around him. And that's kind of what the puddle represents. It represents the disease in the town. And I think the idea that he's a victim almost of his circumstances and of the people around him to an extent. Not entirely. I'm not saying that, like, he's not made his own mistakes and made his own choices that have led to where he is. Like, this idea that he needs to be so tough. But that is definitely also partly influenced by a toxic culture around him where everyone's acting like they're tough. Where, so... not that I'm saying it specifically gets into toxic masculinity, to use a modern phrase, but part of it is in there. It's like that's why he's acting tough at the start. He's like
he specifically calls out Matsunaga and references the girl, saying, like, you think you're tough. She's the one that's tough. She's the one who's actually going through and doing the things she needs to do. You're just pretending everything's fine. That's not what toughness is. Yeah.
So I think on, like, as far as like a character drama goes between these two characters and what they represent to each other, Like, as much as it feels like Matsunaga is kind of the main character because he's the one who's sick and he's the one who has the dramatic moments, I would argue that this movie's really about Sanada. And, like...
Well, I mean, just to put in some behind-the-scenes stuff, originally the script of this movie was heavily focused on just Sanada, and the Matsunaga stuff wasn't anything more than a subplot, but because Kurosawa loves himself some Toshiro Mifune... He saw how he was acting in this and was like, I'm going to expand the crap out of your role, dude. So...
Yeah, it makes me think a lot, in some ways, a very different plot, of course, but it makes me think of Shawshank Redemption, where Andy's kind of the main character, but by the time you get to the end, you're like, no, this was really about Morgan Freeman's character the whole time. Like, he wasn't the one we were following necessarily, but it was about him. It was about changing how he thought and perceived the world.
The difference between the person we spend more time with and the protagonist.
Yeah. So, I think it's a really great little character drama, and it's an early example of Kurosawa. It's an early example of, like, his craft and expertise and how he's able to juggle the filmmaking techniques, in a time before we think of a lot of those techniques, and just really strong, good character work. I mean... There's not really a lot to fault within it. It's just the simple case of it's not flat out balls amazing like Seven Samurai. It's not completely like Seven Samurai effectively broke the mold, whereas this is just a really great drama that still holds up because all of its themes are still very relevant. Everything it's talking about is still very relevant. So it all still works quite a bit.
It did take me a minute, and this was just because of the way that the movie specifically ended, in that he and the woman from the bar go off on this monologue, more or less, just saying like, oh, it was, he was too in deep or whatever. But he goes off on a little bit of a tangent in there of specifically calling out the Yakuza, not in so much feeling like it as a larger theme of the Yakuza representing something else, but for me it felt like this was almost him directly saying to the audience, like, the Yakuza suck, stop glorifying them, sort of thing.
Oh, I can see that for sure. Yeah,
like it just felt like kind of a little personal cut on that one. And obviously when you sit back and think about the larger themes, they can represent the idea of this sickness within somebody and whatnot, but it just felt like an actual thing where he was like, no, that, like, yes, read the themes, but also Yakuza suck.
Well, I was saying kind of the opposite, if anything. I was saying that the Yakuza are the sickness. Like, the sickness is representing what the Yakuza are to society. I was kind of thinking it the other way around, but yeah, sure.
Yeah, that's true. I was saying more so of what the Yakuza represented to Matsunaga. Is just like, it's killing him slowly, sort of thing.
Which, that sounds like a disease to me.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's very good. I don't think I've got anything left to add.
I mean, the only thing that I want to throw out there is we kind of glossed over it because it was very repetitive in the beats that it played out. But the first 45 minutes.
But just to be clear, that was not a problem watching it. No, it didn't feel repetitive as a thing. But it's very much a back and forth until you get to the point where he's willing to maybe listen to Sanada, yeah.
Right, but yeah, the first 45 minutes in this movie, they are critical of building up this relationship, of showing how, despite the fact that they are acting very bitter towards each other, they do still keep on coming back. And, like, the final time when we find out afterwards he came by to give his x-rays to the doctor, he walks in there and he's like, hey, yeah, I came in the pouring rain. I thought we'd have a drink together. And the doctor, for whatever reason, basically just chews him out, says like, no, you're an idiot. I don't want to spend time with you. And Matsunaga leaves off in a huff. He's upset, more or less. And that's the first time that you really get this feeling of like, he did come here as a friend, and Sanada was the one who was too brash with him.
Yeah, you get this feeling that they both on some level need each other. And neither one is willing to admit that or accept it, and that's kind of where the clash comes in from. And because Sanada is very much the angry, overly critical father, but with the best of intentions, kind of at its core.
Yeah, no, honestly, I think the father-son dynamic is probably the one that best describes this. It's someone who is just kind of rebelling for no discernible reason except for it's who they are, and then someone who imposes these strict guidelines, not realizing that they're going to be their own person, sort of thing.
Yeah.
And it's how can those coexist?
Yeah, it's less obviously they're not literally father and son, but it's almost like the father-son bond is kind of formed in the sense that because Sanada recognizes some of his own mistakes in him, he wants to try and guide him because he recognizes those things. So they're kind of father-son in spirit more than they are in relationship or in obviously actual, blood relationship.
Yeah.
But,
right.
So I think that stuff's really good. I think they're very well fleshed out characters. Yeah, and Okada's, he's not like a super in depth character, but he's very effective as the threat. He's very, he's very effective as he is the danger that is coming and like what's going to happen, because it doesn't seem like, because we never get to see Matsunaga like in a fight at his full potential. We kind of see the aftermath of it where he's just kind of shrugging off the fact that he's been shot in the hand. Like the way he's shrugging that off suggests that he is quite tough, that he can hold his own in a fight. But we never see it. So the fact that he's deteriorating throughout the film, so that when the threat's coming, you think, oh, is he going to be heroic? It just makes the fact that when he does have to stand up against Okada on some level, he does it when he can barely stand, and that just makes it all the more powerful.
I do think the best kind of contrast that they do in this movie of showing how far he's fallen by the end is there's this entire opening sequence, probably about 15 minutes in, where Matsunaga just roams the town. He just moves to different shops, and as he passes, everyone like either moves out of the way or bows obediently, and he just picks up a flower, doesn't pay for it, and the shop owner's like, yep, you're good, like you're fantastic, no problem. And it shows just this hold he has over the town, but not in a menacing way. It's just that he has respect. He is in a position where even if he's not actively threatening people, he holds their respect. And then at the end of the movie, when the big boss has put Onaka, I think it is, in his place, he tries to... Okada, that's right. Sorry. I don't have it open. Sorry.
We've been saying a lot throughout this review.
Yeah, that's fair. Okada, when he's put him in his place, he goes and tries to do the same flower thing, which he's done probably like 3 times over the course of this movie thus far. And as he grabs the flower, the shop owner's daughter comes out and says, "Excuse me, sir, that'll be 30 yen." And he fights the shop owner more or less, and the shop owner reveals, yeah, no, we were told to ignore you, like treat you like you're just a normal person because you're no longer the big dog. And that's kind of what starts the spiral downwards in a lot of ways for that scene, but it is definitely this contrast with the earlier one of how much power was taken away from him just overnight without him even doing anything wrong.
Which just further emphasizes just how fake it was in the first place. Like, this power that Yakuza gave him was just this facade that, again, he kept thinking of it as, oh, it's a family, it's honor, I've earned I've paid my dues, so they'll be there to back me up. And it's like, no, you've been disregarded. The first sign that you're not useful, that's it.
Yep.
So, yeah, whereas the doctor is there for him, even though he repeatedly pisses him off, which, the true father-son experience.
Yeah, it's like when you're on a show and the podcast host calls you out for all your little misgivings, and you just keep showing up over and over again.
just the one misgiving.
So are we good? Are we in the ratings? Because I
think so. Yeah. Drunken co-host, give us your rating.
Yeah, it's fruit juice, but yeah. So, I mean, as I said before, I don't quite put it up on the same level as Seven Samurai. I thought that movie was fantastic. It had this epic scope to it. As I said in the beginning, this one does feel like it still has a bit of growing pains. There's a few little things that it's obvious he's still learning his craft. He's still getting into the groove of it, but the building blocks are all there, especially in the way of how he handles these larger themes and the personal relationships between characters. That really shines through. So overall, I'd probably give this one an 8.5. I do still really enjoy it. I think it's very good. But like I said, just 1 or 2 smaller things are holding it back from being up at that same level as Seven Samurai.
Yeah, I really can't argue with that. 8.5 is kind of what I was thinking. That or an 8. I was kind of bouncing between the two a little bit, but
okay.
I'm happy to go with the 8.5. I think it's such a strong showing that achieves everything that it's setting out to do. It's kind of, it's that classic idea of like, okay, it's a director's earlier film, it's a bit smaller in scope, but he nails that what he's aiming for, and that's where you sort of earn the trust to keep going a little bit bigger each time until you end up with the epic of a Seven Samurai or a Ran or whatever he's doing later. So
I do want to point out, I don't know how true this is because obviously I haven't seen it, but I was trying to make sure I was watching the correct version. Apparently, there is a 2 hour and 30-minute director's cut.
Whoa!
And I can't even begin to imagine what that extra hour is.
Yeah, that's 52 minutes, give or take, of extra runtime. That's wild. I mean, Criterion didn't have it on their service, I don't think, because that's where I watched this.
I was unable to find it as well. I did a quick glance for it, but I had no idea. It's apparently Japan. It's listed as Japan only, so I don't know if it just hasn't been localized, but I would love to see what that extra hour adds in.
Obviously from 1948, it's obviously got that look of that time period because, film... When you're watching that, it's quite shaky, there's a lot of lines, things, it looks its age. Yeah. I can't imagine what deleted scenes that weren't well preserved in a can somewhere that were added in later look like from 1948.
Not great.
Because see if you watch like the deleted scenes in, say, I don't know, the Ghostbusters like Blu-ray, and they've got all the SD deleted scenes on there as an extra, and they look so rough. Like, they look they're from the 50s or something. The way they're scratching around and they're jumping and all the rest of it. And then obviously the actual movie looks beautiful. It's pristine because it's been remastered and well preserved.
It's been preserved. Yeah.
So, anywho, there you go. Making the cut. I think it's safe to say that it is making the cut.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't personally feel that it is a cut above. I think it is solid, but I don't quite think it gets that extra little oomph to it.
No, I think that's fair. I think it's very comfortably making the cut, but I won't put it in a cut above, especially since we're on the Criterion show. The standard for what the cut aboves are is quite high. After all,
it's the exact opposite of extra reels, where it's like, oh no.
Yes, Extra Reels, of course, is our other monthly Patreon bonus show where we, do the worst of the worst. We do the opposite of Criterion, the Shiterion collection.
We're workshopping. We'll get there.
Yeah, we don't have a name for that part of it. But anyway, that is our thoughts on Drunken Angel, one of the earlier Akira Kurosawa films, and we'll be back to Kurosawa probably sometime in about 6 months, give or take. Yes, next time we're doing an Ingmar Bergman film. We don't know which yet, though, because it's going to be a vote for our patrons to decide. So there'll be 3 Bergman movies up for choice. And I say up for, by the time this goes out, it'll probably be past tense. But our patrons will have been able to pick between 3 Ingmar Bergman films.
And our patrons are the only ones who can watch them, because once again, this is it for public.
Yes. This is a Patreon-only show starting next episode. So thank you very much for joining us. We do appreciate it. If you do like these Criterion episodes, consider going and supporting us over at patreon.com/MailFuzzTV. But that is the show, so thank you once again for watching or listening. We always appreciate it. Keep watching movies, and in the words of Martin Scorsese, this is cinema.